Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. Super excited to have you here. I'm joined today by one of my all-time favorite people, Miss Jordan Davis. And yet, before we get into the topic for today, just wanted to remind you that next week we're going to have a very special guest. We're not announcing who that is just yet, but you will find out very soon. And we'll be back here next week with our special guest for Wellness Wednesday. That will be Wednesday, the 28th at 9 Central, as always. So, looking forward to seeing you there then. The other thing I just wanted to announce, and I think this is really cool. Next week, our team is flying into Lawrence, Kansas, where I live, and we are going to be recording My Freed Life Digital. So Jordan Davis will be here, Madison Peeler will be here, so that we can record My Freed Life. And any of you that want to take that course anytime that you want from the comfort of your home and office, it will be available to you. So be on the lookout for that.
Or if you
So
find yourself talking over and over all the time to your spouse about it, it's a great time to get them in on the conversation too.
there you go.
I
I
just send
love that.
mine to Colorado. I had to say, take a day off, go to Colorado, go see Jordan Freed.
That's right. That's right. I remember that. That was fun. All right, let's dive in here. So this week we're going to be talking about the inner critic to the inner coach. And I have with us today Jordan Davis. If you can't tell already, she is the prettier of the two Jordans. Jordan has been a longtime friend, coaching client, and one of the developers of the My Freed Life material with me. And this is a topic that she is especially passionate about. And so, Jordan, the inner critic to the inner coach, I think that for us to best illustrate this, you've got a great story about the inner critic to the inner coach. Would you mind just sharing that with everybody real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember from our 6 years of coaching together, Freed, I called Jordan Freed or Mr. Fredrickson, because he reminds me of the guy from Up, the old man from Up. But I'm such a visual learner, and so I really like paint out or refer it to a life situation in everything that I do. And when I teach My Freed Life alongside you, or when I'm teaching when you're not there. And so, yeah, inner critic to inner coach. So, I have this story that I call A Tale of Two Brothers. And the story really isn't totally about my brothers, but, in eighth grade, all of my closest friends had decided that they were going to play on the middle school volleyball team. And unbeknownst to me, and I found myself that year really missing out on all the fun and all the stories. And so when it came to ninth grade tryouts, I decided, you know what, I'm going to get in on this action and I'm going to try out too. So I signed up for tryouts, and I have two older brothers, an eldest and a middle brother, who both are still older than me. And my mom had instructed my eldest brother to pick me up from middle school and take me to high school for the tryouts that day. And just like every senior in high school, male, he was way more consumed with his girlfriend than literally anything else in the world. And so actually that day he forgot to come pick me up. But in the meantime, I had shared with my friends who had already played on the team for a year that I had planned on trying out. And I was actually honestly shocked at the response that I got. And they were like, "You don't have experience. You're not going to make the team. You don't even have knee pads. You've never played with a volleyball. Like, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know the lineup. You don't know the rotation." And I was just hit with all of these, whereas I thought I was going to have support from these friends, I was hit with all this criticism from them. And in turn, I started to internalize that. And then the story in my head started to be, I haven't ever played. I'm going to look like an idiot. What was I thinking? I then took my brother not picking me up for tryouts as a sign that maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe I'm not supposed to try out. Well, I decided to walk to my middle brother's work, which happened often when my oldest brother forgot to pick me up. He worked about a quarter mile from my school. So back in the day, when if your parent forgot to pick you up, you could just walk to your brother's work. I don't think you can do that anymore these days. I walked to his work and I was really scared to tell him that I had talked myself out of it or I had let my friends talk me out of it. And so I sat on the parking lot curb and I just sobbed and I didn't want to tell him. But I knew in order to get home, I had to tell him why I was there. He happened to see me and come out from work. He had just started working and he came and sat down with me and he's like, "What in the world is going on?" So I told him about my friends and I told him what they had said and that I had decided they were right and that I was never going to make the team and I was going to make an idiot out of myself. And my middle brother reminded me, um, everything you set your mind to, you've achieved. You've tried harder things than this before. You give everything your best shot, even if you fail, you knew you gave it your all in the end. And my brother convinced me. He went inside, talked to his boss, and asked if he could take off work to take me to practice and come in like an hour late that day. And he said, "If I take you and I sit there with you," I said, "Who's going to warm me up? I'm late now. Who's going to warm me up?" He said, "I'll warm you up." And he said, "If I take you and I help you and I sit there with you until I bet you're going to be having so much fun you don't even know that I leave." And he did exactly that. I went to the tryouts. He warmed me up, gave me words of encouragement, and that started to be the script that was in my head. That started to be the playlist that was in my head was, I've done harder things than this. If I set my mind to it, I can make this happen. And then the other thing that he made me do was promise that everywhere I went, if my feet were moving, I was jogging, I was hustling. So even if coach called a water break and we were exhausted, I hustled to get water. If coach said, "Go get in a line over here," I hustled over there. Every drill, every ball we shagged, every water break, I hustled everywhere I went. Well, in fact, it was kind of cool because the other girls started hustling too and picked up the pace with me, right? And they saw that and they picked up on it. So after tryouts, they posted who made the team, literally in order of who they drafted. So I'm sure they would never do this anymore, but it was literally like 1 to 20. These are the girls that made the team. And I was dead last, y'all, but I made the team. And my coach gave me the feedback. He said, "You're the worst player out here. You have absolutely no skills, but you have a hustle that I can't teach anyone else. And I feel like you're going to work really hard and I can teach you the rest. In fact, if nothing else, you will make the rest of the team hustle if you keep up the attitude that you brought to tryouts." So how did it all turn out? Well, 4 years later, I graduated that coach's most valuable player and captain of the volleyball team. In fact, I had 2 scholarships to go play college volleyball.
I love that. And so the inner critic to the inner coach, walk us through the contrast of that, right? You had the audience of your friends who were sharing with you that they didn't think you had it, you never played before, you weren't ready, you weren't prepared, and then you had your brother, right? So it's the contrast between those two groups that we really want people to see here, correct?
Yeah. And it's interesting when you think about the voices that talk you out of things. Whose voice is that? Asking yourself that question. Whose
Mhm.
voice is it that I hear when I find myself saying, "There's no way I'm going to make it. I'm obviously going to fail. They should have never picked me, or I'm never going to get this opportunity." Whose voice is that? Because that can
Right.
tell you a lot about where that came from.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Jordan, it reminds me of a coaching call I did with a woman one time, and her father was somebody that had a lot of fear, and she had really big aspirations. In fact, she wanted to build this entire company, and he would constantly bring to light that she'd never built a company before. You've never been an entrepreneur. You don't have the money. Blah 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 blah. And it was in listening to her that I realized she was in conflict with him, right? She was basically in opposition to whatever it was that he was teaching. And I said, "You don't really understand what was going on here." And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, what your father is telling you is that you're scaring him. You're making him uncomfortable. And he's doing his best actually to protect you. He's
Mhm.
trying to protect you from the disappointment, and he's trying to protect you from the rejection, whatever might happen. And the thing I want people to hear is that the group of people who often are encouraging you not to follow through, that voice in your head that's telling you not to go after whatever it is that you're wanting, it has a positive intent. The intent is always found, and it is trying to protect you from or provide you with. And we get into this conflict with it, and when whatever are going to resist will persist, right? And so we get into this conflict with it, and we make it stronger, and it wears us out. And so when we talk about this conversion of the inner critic to the inner coach, what I really mean by this, I believe each and every one of us has what I call the personal podcast. And the personal podcast is the story you tell to yourself about yourself when you are by yourself. And it is the power broker of your life. And it's the story that no one but you hears. What we ultimately are looking for first, as Jordan mentioned, is to put yourself in a position of just observing that voice. And in my freed life, we talk about this process, right, Jordan, of making the unconscious conscious. And it's the observation and then the examination of those parts of you. So,
Right.
where did this come from? Whose voice is this, right?
And understand that your brain plays tricks on you. It's also trying to do what her dad did. It's trying to keep you safe. And your
Yep.
brain seeks to keep things the same to keep you safe. And so you tend to look for things that affirm what you already believe. And
Yep.
so if your brain is trying to keep you safe, it's looking for ways that you failed before. And you've really got to call that into question and change your thinking and choose to focus on what if it did work out? When has something worked out that I didn't think maybe would, and how did I get there? And challenge those thoughts and look for more affirmations of times that you did accomplish that. In the way that my brother gave me back, I've seen you try harder things. You do anything you set your mind to, right? And really look to reprogram that thinking in the way your brain tries to just keep you the same all the time through doubt.
Yeah, and the thing about that is, there's a lot there that you just unpacked. And one thing is that your fear is an inaccurate forecaster. Oftentimes your fear is like the weatherman in Kansas. It's not as accurate as you think that it is, or believe it to be. And looking at its track record, as you just mentioned, is really important. But the other thing is that if you really want to know, how do I in the moment convert my inner critic to an inner coach? And I believe this is probably the most fundamental coaching idea that I've ever developed. It's the idea of best advice, best life. And I don't know how many times I've asked this question of Jordan or the people that I've had the good fortune of working with, but the moments of doubt, the moments of, I don't know if this is meant for me. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if it's possible. I've found that cheerleading people does work for a time, but is often not sustainable. What I have to help them figure out, and I would encourage you all to write this down, is you need a tool that mines the wisdom of your head and your heart. You need a tool that can be used in real time, in the real world, that mines the wisdom of your head and your heart. And it all came from this quote from a book that is one of the most profound books that had the biggest impact on me. It's called Daring Greatly, from Brene
Brene Brown.
Brown. Yep, amazing book. And inside of it is this quote, and I'll paraphrase this for you, but she says that in learning to parent in a culture of never enough, it's not about parenting the right way. It's about being the adult you want your kids to be. And children are a real blessing because they give us a standard to live by. And you don't have to have kids, though, to enact this tool to mine the wisdom of your head and your heart. But when you think about those moments of challenge, rejection, doubt, impossibility, whatever it is, it helps so much to put yourself in the space of, if this were my kid, if my oldest daughter, Leah, was my age, this was her business, this was her challenge. and she called me up and said, "Dad, I don't know what to do." The first thing I would do is start asking her questions. So the first part of this tool is in the context of the people that you love most. What questions would you ask them? And I know the first question I would ask her: what do you want? And I want all of you to write this down and remember this forever. You will never know what to do until you know what you want. You have to figure out what you want. And by the way, that's your job. That is your responsibility. No one is going to do that work for you. There are people out there that own companies that will offer you big enough salaries to give up your dreams, but you ultimately are responsible for figuring out what it is that you want out of this life. The second question is based upon the answers that she gives me. There's going to be advice that I would dispense to her. And I just have this very simple belief that whatever that advice is, in that moment, in that context, I have to summon the courage to live it. Because the wisdom that we would give to our children is the deepest, richest source of wisdom that we have. Right, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, it's like we believe that they deserve it in a way
Yeah,
that for some reason we don't believe we do.
that's so right. You're so right.
And
I could not have said that better.
it's
You're
just
right.
not true, right? I mean, I don't know why at some point in our lives we convince ourselves that we don't deserve it. And it's, Freed, when you ask a child what they want to be when they grow up, the younger you catch the child, like the bigger and crazier ideas, right? Like they're going to be the president. And some of it's like made up. My son told me one time he was going to be a scuba diving paleontologist. And I'm like, what?
You live in Texas, dude.
But it's just, and then suddenly you start to ask when they're 8, 9, 10, 11, and it's like, I want to be a dentist. I want to be and the dreams like kind of pull back, right? And we find ourselves less deserving as we go through life and we start to internalize those external voices. But it's important, especially as we instill in our kids, to remember to instill it in ourselves. Don't listen to that voice. That voice is
That's
not
right.
true. That voice is not correct. That bully at school or that parent trying to protect you, or maybe sometimes it's even your spouse.
Yeah.
Don't internalize that. That's not for you.
That's right. That's right. And there's a fundamental principle here that I believe is so true across the spectrum of the human experience, which is you will never become a winner talking to yourself like a loser. You just won't. And you all have heard me say this before, but it's worth mentioning again. It's like if you dig a hole to plant a tree, and let's say you want an apple tree, but you drop an avocado seed in the ground and cover it up and start watering it, it does not matter how much you pray or what type of rain dance you do, you are not going to get an apple tree from an avocado seed. And I was thinking about this yesterday as we were preparing for this because Jordan, it kind of hit me. I can't think of anything in my life that I have been successful with that started with shame. I don't know that I've ever been able to shame myself into success. And even if I did get myself to take action based upon moving away from shame, whatever it was that I created as a result of that didn't feel worth it because of what I had to go through to get it. It didn't strengthen me, it sacrificed me in some way. Does that make
Well, and I think,
sense?
yeah, and as a society, we all look for the external to calm and heal and quiet the internal when it has to be the opposite. It has to come from internally. And then, like, there is nothing but success in everything you touch. And even if you fail, you learned, right? Because
Yeah.
it comes from internally. But when you start externally, we talk about this in My Free Life, when I, then I language.
Yeah.
In the steels, we talk about language, which is when I, then I, and that's dangerous because that is an external validation to heal something internally. But the reality is you have to already be that person. And that takes you coaching yourself. No amount, we did 6 years of coaching and 30 minutes of your time per week. If I don't continue to do that work and have Jordan Freed's voice in my head, I would never become the person internally that could produce the external that I desired.
Yeah, well, and I think that also that comes fundamentally from a belief that I have that really resonated with you, and it comes from, hey, Jordan, do you remember what is the store that is my all time like unfavorite, dislike this store? What's the store I can't stand more than
Claire.
anything? Claire's. I
Yes.
hate Claire's, and many of you know I have two daughters, and I pride myself on being the girl dad, right? Like I took my kids to Taylor Swift concert without my wife. Like I'll do anything. You want to do Disney on Ice? I'm in. But Claire's, I will not go. I hate that store with everything in me. And the reason why is that most of the stuff that they sell there is cheap and it breaks. And so the girls would get these little necklaces and they would bring them to me. And of course, they're all tangled up. And being such an amazing father, if they were asking me to fix it, what I would actually do is just wait till they turned around and threw it away because I didn't want to deal with it. But my wife, Rochelle, is much more patient than I in some ways. And she would sit there and meticulously untangle these necklaces. And it served as one of the greatest metaphors for coaching people and ourselves because the metaphor is that you're not broken, you're tangled. I don't believe inherently that people are broken. They don't need to be fixed, but they do get tangled. But see, what happens is that when they are tangled, the manner in which they seek to get untangled tangled is through tension. And so imagine that you have this necklace, right? And if you are pulling on it, you're making it worse. And I think that's kind of the approach that we take as it relates to ourselves and why it's so important to put it through the perspective of our children because we love them like nothing else and we have patience for them. And by the way, if you're sitting in the audience today going, well, I don't have kids, that's fine. There's somebody in the world that you love. And so just substitute that kids for that person. But it's funny how we always know what to do when we aren't looking at things through the lens of our own personal drama, when we're not looking at it through our own stories. So
I would call
Jordan,
out two things in that story that you just shared, Freed. And the first is that you deemed it to be a $4 necklace, but it was the pink one with jewels. And to your daughter, it had value, right? It
it's
was
true.
invaluable.
True. Yep.
And so, like, we assign our own worth, and what may, at some point seem like worthless, it is invaluable.
Hmm.
And it can't be replaced. You can't be replaced. You're worthy of the work.
Yep.
And then secondly, it reminds me when you were talking about the untangling and the stress, that quote that we say in My Free Life, abuse does not incite performance,
That's right.
right? And you had said, you can't talk negative to get to the positive. But similarly, abuse does not incite performance. Like you can't just beat that necklace up and then wonder why it didn't untangle itself. You have to have patience and you have to celebrate the small wins when you get that tiny little piece unhooked. And all of that can be transferred to our inner coach.
That's right. That's right. And I think that inherently in what you just said, especially the first part about worthiness, the first thing I want you to understand about worthiness is that worthiness is like sleep. The more you focus on what you don't have or aren't getting, the less you're going to get. Sleep is one of those paradoxes that when you pursue it, it evades you. And worthiness worry is complete waste. Sitting around wondering and worrying about your own self worth is complete waste. And what I want you to understand, and she alluded to this, is that you are the appraiser of your worth. And you know this to be true because if you had an appraisal report that showed all the things about you and who you are and the blessing of your life, if you had a kid in front of you that had their own appraisal report, whether it was your kid or anybody else's, you would never ever say to them, let someone else write on your report. You would never say that to them. You would say that you are the author of your own worthiness. You are the only one that can write on that report. And so I think it's worth saying that you can use this best advice, best life in so many different ways. And one of the biggest is converting that inner critic to an inner coach around your own worthiness. Just understand anytime you're looking at an idea or something that needs to be stress tested, you can run it through this filter of would I teach this to a kid? Would I talk to a kid this way? And oftentimes you're going to find the answer is no. And it's because what she just said, abuse does not incite performance. It's just like a horse. If you ride it so hard, eventually it's just going to lay down and say, shoot me. I'm not going to ride anymore.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Jordan, any parting thoughts as we start to wrap this up?
Have you seen that meme that says like water at the grocery store is 10 cents, water at a baseball game is $1, but if you go to like a professional football game, it's $10. Like it's not about like your worth just may be where you're at. And I love that for the appraiser of your own life and deciding, you know, who it is that I am, what it is that I offer, obviously with being realistic, but that takes a hell of an inner coach.
Yep, that's right. And the thing I would encourage everyone here to do is be great in the world of small things. Oftentimes, especially in the personal development world, we spend too much time trying to think big. Well, if you're going to think big, you've got to learn how to win small. And what I mean by that is if you go through the next week between now and the next Wellness Wednesday, and you have one moment that you use something from today's conversation to convert your inner critic to an inner coach, you do it one time. Well, that is winning. Just do it once. Be great in the world of small things. So we love all of you. Thank you for being here. Jordan, thank you for coming today and sharing your story, imparting your knowledge on everyone. We're all better for it. And I trust that I'm going
Thank
to
you,
get
Mr. Fredrickson.
If you don't know who that is, that's the guy from Up. The problem is I try to insult her back by saying, you look like the dragon lady from Game of Thrones, but that obviously doesn't do very much to insult her. But thank you all for being here and go live free. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.